Hey, welcome back to another episode of the Prize Podcast where we talk about how sports and the Christian worldview intersect one another. Thank you for joining in on this episode on July 31st, 2024. We're on the last episode of July, and so I appreciate you kind of being patient with me. I also wanted to say thank you for also being patient with me as I'm trying to figure out all the technology stuff. I have just uploaded a new podcast software that I haven't normally used for this podcast, and so I'm still figuring it out and just trying to get things together. So thank you for joining in and being patient with me as I'm still figuring things out, even not just for this podcast, but also for my other podcast called The Pastoral Associates. If you would like to know more about that, you can follow us on Amazon. You can follow us on Spotify, and you can follow us on Apple Podcasts today. Again, I'm Kyle Hunsinger. I'm a student pastor at Chapin Baptist Church. And today's sporting news starts off with our men's gymnastics. I talked a little bit about that yesterday. Just wanted another reminder on that they have won the bronze medal. So that was a really good win for them and uh, a really good thing for Team USA. Good thing for Team USA is they won the overall gold medal for women's gymnastics. Simone Biles and Sunny Lee led the charge on that and did a fantastic job. I got to watch a little bit of the highlights as of last night. So I'm a little bit late to the game, but not really, and really enjoyed that matchup. One of the biggest matchups that's going to happen today at 3 o'clock Eastern Time. It should be on NBC. If not, you can probably catch it online if you have a subscription to YouTube TV or another TV subscription. One's going to be USA Basketball. They have to play South Sudan. If you remember a couple of weeks ago, it hasn't been too long ago, they played South Sudan and it went down to the last minute, and it was really, really, really tough. And so we want to keep that game in mind at 3 o'clock Eastern Time today. The other one that we also want to keep in context, is we also want to make sure that we look at what women's basketball is doing and continue to support them as well. In addition, I also want to today, every week I get to talk about college football. So that's going to be the main focus of today. I know we've been talking a lot about the Olympics and just kind of getting some small catch up in that with a little bit of kind of dipping our toes in the water. But today I want to talk about the major games of the second weekend of college football. Technically, I think it's like the third weekend where you get into September the 14th, that Saturday. I have a couple on the list that I want us to talk about today. I'm going to go down the list and talk about them. One of the not least importance, but some that are a little bit, I guess you could say, not as much primetime games, but will still have some significance in their conference. One of them being Georgia versus Kentucky on September the 14th. That will be at 7:30 Eastern Time. That is on a Saturday. I think that's an important game from Georgia again. If you remember last week, I talked about how they will have to play kind of more of a lower tier school. I think it's important for us to remember that they need to come out steamrolling for their first big conference game. It's going to be at Kentucky. Georgia does not have an easy schedule. They had a really easy schedule last year. This year is a little bit tougher on the away schedule. And I think they have to play Alabama. That's going to be a tough game for them, but I still think Georgia is up for the task as long as they stay consistent, and you can't go wrong with Kirby Smart. The other game that I think is pretty interesting to me is the backyard brawl. You've got West Virginia versus Pittsburgh. That's going to be a good game on September the 14th. I think that Pittsburgh will win that game. I think Pittsburgh's got a lot to prove this year. They did not do as well as they wanted to last year. I think Coach Narduzzi, has got a lot that he wants to do with this team this year to make sure they are back in the ACC championship race. They're going to have a lot of work to do to get back up there, but Pittsburgh is a very tough team. Another game that's going to be pretty intriguing is Oregon versus Oregon State. That will be pretty intriguing because if I'm not mistaken, Oregon State is in a different conference. I think they're in the Big 12 or the Pac 12. But the one I know for certain is Oregon is in the Big Ten. And so it's going to be the first time in a long time that they are in different conferences, and they're going to show a rivalry game early for this one. So this will be pretty interesting for September the 14th. Another big game that will prove a lot is Texas A&M versus Florida. We're going to see how Billy Napier, how he really does. A lot of people think he's on the hot seat, so we're going to kind of see what does he really do against a Texas A&M team that, again, has a lot to prove. They've got a lot to really get in and do. And they've got a new head coach, and he's very familiar, Mike Elko. Mike Elko was the coach for the Duke Blue Devils, and so that's going to be really intriguing. I know this is blasphemy, especially with me wearing a Tar Heel shirt today, but I really like Mike Elko as a coach. I know him and Mac Brown have not gotten along sometimes in the past, and Mac Brown had his number. So I think that's really good that he gets back into SEC football. Let's see how he does with this defense, because since he's got a big defensive mind. For my South Carolina Gamecock fans, you got LSU on that Saturday, September the 14th. That'll be a really intriguing game, but it's at South Carolina. LSU has a lot to upgrade from the next year. And what I mean by that is they have lost some of their key players, but LSU is LSU, so we'll see how they do going into Williams-Brice Stadium and playing a Gamecock team that, again, has a lot to prove. They've got to really do better this year in order for them to be on a good path towards at least a decent record this year. And then finally, last but not least, the one game I want to talk to that will lead into our Christian worldview topic today is Alabama versus Wisconsin. I talked about this a couple of months ago. Probably one of the biggest games for Alabama, not because Wisconsin is better than them. I do not think that Wisconsin is better than Alabama. I think Alabama is better. The problem with Wisconsin is it's at Wisconsin. So that's going to be a very intriguing game. The true enemy of that game is not as much going to be the Wisconsin players, although they've got to play the game and they've got to play well. It's going to be that Wisconsin crowd. That crowd is a big crowd. It's a very lively crowd. There's a lot of students in that crowd. So people need to realize that. People need to see, especially Alabama with their new head coach, they need to realize, hey, listen, this is going to be a tough environment. This is going to be an environment that is going to be ready to rock and roll and to be loud. And if you don't think for a second they want to put an L on Alabama's record as their first L of the season, you got another thing coming. So I think Alabama's got to come in ready. I think if they play steady defense and then they play conservative or consistent offense, they're going to do really well. They need to run the ball, run the ball, run the ball, then shoot for your passes when you can with Jalen Milroe. Do what you can best for that. But it can be really difficult in that context, especially being away from away from home and in a different state and just a different culture. Now, Alabama's played in big stadiums. I'm not saying they're not used to it. I'm just saying this is a big-time matchup. They don't have Nick Saban. They've got a new coach, and they need to go in ready with a right mindset. They don't need to go in complaining. They don't need to go in with a negative mindset. They need to go in with the right mindset, ready to win. And a lot of times in our life, that's the way we can come in. We can come at the mindset of going into a place where we don't know and being very much in a place where we think we're being brought low in the sense that we can be discouraged. Well, the people of Israel in the book of Exodus, and this is where a lot of my topics for the Christian worldview is going to come from this fall, is from the book of Exodus, because that's what I'm studying. And one of the things that I've realized is, number one, that the people of God had a true enemy. And what I've realized through studying this book is it's not Pharaoh. Pharaoh was an enemy. He was an enemy of the God of the universe, the Lord God, the God of his people. But you don't see Satan in the text of like his name, but you can definitely see his power and his work behind the scenes. Pharaoh is trying to stop the growth and the multiplication of the people of God. It talks about in the book of Exodus in the first two chapters that Pharaoh, or the king, the new king of Egypt at the time, was just very upset that the people of Israel from the 12 tribes of Jacob, or the 12 tribes of Israel, are now becoming a people, and they're multiplying, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. And so he tries to stop it by suppressing them with labor, forced labor, but then he also tries to suppress them by killing their offspring. So think about that for a second. a culture where life is not valued and where the life is being suppressed. That's what you're seeing in that culture. That's very similar to the culture that we see today as well. We're seeing a devaluing of life, whether it be in the womb or out of the womb. And we have to be careful to recognize that the true enemy is not the person who is necessarily supporting abortion. We are supposed to be against anything that goes against devaluing life, but the very person that is the murderer at heart is Satan himself, and he instills that and tries to instill that in people and to turn their back on God. And so that's the people of Egypt, but that's their leader, and they're suppressing the people of God. But God is making his reminder that even in that context, that's a very difficult context with an enemy, God is still fulfilling his promises. Through the Hebrew midwives, they still find faithfulness in the midst of fear. I'm not saying Alabama fears anyone. I don't think they fear anybody. I think they're going to come in ready to play. But there's always the nerves that come into playing a game like that. And so I think for them, they've got to go in with the right mindset of knowing that that step of faith, it can be filled with fear, but it can also be filled with confidence and a true faith. You got to think about Moses. Moses was scared to death when he realized what he did by trying to defend one of his people. He did not want to be associated with the Egyptians, even though his identity was an Egyptian at the time when he was brought into Pharaoh's family. But he decided to forsake that, as it talks about in the book of Hebrews, in order that he may identify with the people of God. That's true faith. Now, he did kill one of the Egyptians that was trying to suppress one of his people of Israel for an act of justice, as it talks about in Acts 7. But what we can see through this is even in fear of him leaving, there was a step of faith too, because in the same time, him leaving Pharaoh's house was a step of faith. Now, was there some fears that took place? Absolutely. And so I think with all that being said, when it comes to sports or when it comes to the Christian life, we're always going to take those steps of where there was going to be fear. But the thing we have to realize most importantly as we close today is this: do we fear God or do we fear man? Do we fear Pharaoh or do we fear the Lord? Do we fear Wisconsin? Do we fear the opponent that's ahead, or do we fear the act of wanting to be obedient to someone? And I believe our ultimate obedience is to God himself. So thank you for joining in on the show today. If you have any more questions, you can contact me at pursuetheprize@gmail.com, or you can contact me at kmoneydh. That is my X handle, formerly known as Twitter. Thank you for joining in on the show where we talk about sports and how the Christian worldview intersect one another. I hope you have a great day, and God bless.